Hi folks, my name is Joey Lee and this is my video on metafiction. It's my first attempt and there's a cat behind the camera, so I'm hoping he doesn't knock it over. I'm going to look at metafiction from the perspective of some novels I teach in my high school classes, specifically Huckleberry Finn for the most part, but I'm also going to refer to To Kill a Mockingbird and the recent prequel-sequel, Go Set a Watchman. So my father introduced me to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn when I was a little boy, and my sister as well. And I wanted to bring my love of this novel to my high school English students. And as a child, I didn't consider so much the controversy and the racial, language, racist language in the book. But as a teacher, I have to be more aware of that. And I have to say I haven't had any complaints from parents so far. I have had other teachers mention to me that they thought maybe I shouldn't use this novel. But I do anyway. So, the books To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer have been really well loved by my students. And that makes me happy, and they get that they are anti-racist works. So in terms of metafictive devices, I'm going to refer to some that I noted in Sylvia Pantalio's list of metafictive devices in her article, Young Children Interpret the Metafictive in Anthony Brown's Voices in the Park. And she says this list is not exhaustive. So I'm also going to refer to another one that Phil Nell talked about in his YouTube video on metafiction. So the first one that I want to talk about is the one that Sylvia calls obtrusive narrators who address the reader and comment on their own narration. And we see this right away in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And Huck is the narrator, and he talks about the trustworthiness of Mark Twain, and he says, "You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But what that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain. He told the truth mainly. There was things which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That is nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another without it was Aunt Polly or the widow or maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, that's Tom's Aunt Polly, she is, and Mary, and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book with some stretchers, as I said before." So not only is the narrator addressing the book, he's referring to another book, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which I'll talk about intertextuality in a bit. And another thing that Twain does is he has a notice, and he says, "Persons attempting to find a motive in this novel will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot by order of the author." And he has an explanatory as well, which relates to another one of the metafictional devices, and that's the excess of linguistic, literary, social, conceptual, and ethical narrative. He's talking about the language in the book, and he says, "In this book a number of dialects are used, to wit, the Missouri Negro dialect, the extremist form of backwoods southwestern dialect, the ordinary Pike County dialect, and 4 modified varieties of the last. The shadings have not been done in a haphazard fashion or by guesswork, but painstakingly, and with the trustworthy guidance and support of personal familiarity with these several forms of speech. I make this explanation for the reason that without it, many readers would suppose that all the characters were trying to talk alike and not succeeding the author." I mean, clearly this gets us to be thinking about what he wants us to think about, the language, and the language is an issue here in terms of modern readers. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. So another device that I want to refer to, as I said, was the linguistic narrative. And I'm going to look at a speech I can find the right page. And this one is, it's Tom's Aunt Polly talking, and you're getting an idea of the dialects that are used here. So, I lost my page, sorry. Well, Sister Phelps, I've ransacked that air cabin over, and I believe that slave was crazy. Notice I said slave, I don't say the N-word. Talk about that later as well. I said to Sister Damrell, didn't I, Sister Damrell? Says I, he's crazy. Says I, there's the very words I said. You'll all heard me. He's crazy. Says I, everything shows it. Says I, look at that air grindstone. Says I, want to tell me 10 creatures in his right minds are going to scrabble all them crazy things onto that air grindstone? Says I, here's such and such a person busted his heart, and here's so and so pegged along for 37 years and all that. Natural son of Louis somebody, and such everlasting rubbish. So that's just an example of Aunt Polly and her linguistic expression. So the next one that I want to talk about is the intertextuality. And in the intertextuality that I'm referring to here is Tom's references to the works of Alexander Dumas. Tom reveres these adventure stories, and so in Huckleberry Finn, they're trying to break Jim out of slavery, and he's been locked in Uncle Silas's cabin, and Tom wants to do it the way the authorities do, and the authorities are in the books of Alexander Dumas. So Tom reveres these books, and he says, and it's Huck that starts, "Confound it, it's foolish, Tom. No, make no difference how foolish it is. It's the right way, and it's the regular way, and there ain't no other way that I ever heard of, and I've read all the books that gives any information about these things. They always dig out with a case knife. Not through dirt, mind you. Generally, it's through solid rock. It takes them weeks and weeks and weeks and forever and ever. Why, look at one of them prisoners in the bottom dungeon of Castle Deef in the harbor of Marseille. They dug himself out that way. How long was he at it, you reckon? I don't know. Well, guess. I don't know. Month and a half. 37 years, and he came out in China, and that's the kind. I wish the bottom of this fortress was solid rock." So, not only does Tom refer to the fictional escape in fictional literature, he also refers to Lord Guilford, the husband of Lady Jane Grey, and Baron Trenck, who escaped. So I'm not exactly sure what the difference between intertextuality and an allusion is, and but anyway, Twain also frequently parodies things in his novel, especially society in general. So I'm going to call the references to Alexander Dumas a pastiche, not a parody, because I think he puts them up on a pedestal. So the video by Phil Nell refers to another metafictive device, challenging discourse on society's values and attitude. The reader is challenged to engage in a critical analysis of this. And I think this is probably the same thing that Pantaleo is referring to as an excess of social and ethical narrative. And in Huckleberry Finn, Huck's internal struggles with Southern society's views on slavery and African Americans is due to his upbringing. And, Huck's dad, Pap, is your typical poor white cracker. And so we can see that Huck's internal debate in a couple of these passages here. So he's come to terms, he's going to break Jim out of slavery, but he thinks he should send a letter to Miss Watson, Jim's owner. And his letter is brief. "Miss Watson, your runaway slave Jim is down here 2 miles below Pikesville, and Mr. Phelps has got him, and he will give him up for the reward if you send Huck Finn." And Huck is debating with himself, but he knows that society tells him that that slavery is right and acceptable. He feels it's wrong himself, and he has this internal debate, and it goes on for quite a bit of the novel. And at one point, he just decides that, well, he doesn't care. He's going to go to hell. And his belief is that because society has convinced him that slavery is acceptable, that if he helps a slave out of slavery, that he will be damned to the everlasting fires of hell. So now brings us to the controversy in Huckleberry Finn. Is it racist, or is it a product of racist times? And I subscribe to the latter view. I find that Mark Twain's work is profoundly anti-racist, and my students have always been appalled that the books were banned, along with To Kill a Mockingbird, because they feel that they're anti-racist. And my favorite story is a former student of mine just became so angry at Tom Robinson's fate in To Kill a Mockingbird that she cried. And this is the scene that upset her so much. "What's the matter?" Aunt Alexandra asked, alarmed by the look on my father's face. "Tom's dead." Aunt Alexandra put her hands to her mouth. "They shot him," said Atticus. "He was running." This speech always breaks me up. "It was during the exercise period. They said he just broke into a blind, raving charge at the fence and started climbing over right in front of them. Didn't they try to stop him? Didn't they give him any warning?" Aunt Alexandra's voice shook. "Oh yes, the guards called on him to stop. They fired a few shots in the air, then to kill. They got him just as he went over the fence. They said if he'd had 2 good arms, he'd have made it. He was moving that fast. 17 bullet holes in him. They didn't have to shoot him that much, Cal. I want you to come out with me and help me to tell Helen." So just, my former student was just so appalled that, such a thing could happen even in the 1930s during the time period of this novel. Talking about banned books, and as I said, Huckleberry Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird have been banned. So now there's an edited form of the novel that's coming out. And so the N-word becomes slave, which is what I've done myself. Injun Joe becomes Indian Joe. Half-breed becomes half-blood. And so the authorities, or the critics, have a couple of takes on this. And one such authority says the edited books is for readers who can't get past the slur to take in the rest of the book and therefore understand Twain's opposition to racism. And that's so I'm okay with the editing in terms of as I'm reading it, because I can't bring myself to say the words. But I also understand the people that call this censorship. So, for example, Sally Hansen says, "The solution is not to change the writer, you will educate the reader." And scholars like Dudley Barlow also suggest that painful and objectionable language is purposeful and we should talk about it. And this is what I do in my classroom. We talk about the era, we talk about the struggle, and we also talk about individuals like Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King. And I read Tom Sawyer in grade 9, To Kill a Mockingbird in grade 10, Huckleberry Finn in grade 11. And so this is all taught in a broader spectrum of anti-racist and civil rights movement plan that I have in my head. I also talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. So, and I think my plan is clear to my students, because my grade 11s last year, I had read To Kill a Mockingbird with them, and they were anticipating the release of Go Set a Watchman. And they knew I was going to be their grade 12 teacher, and they wanted to read it in grade 12. And I having not read it at that point, I was unsure whether it would be acceptable. And so having now read Go Set a Watchman, I see it as flawed, but you can see Harper Lee's genius in here, and what I see as the biggest genius of Go Set a Watchman is the fact that the narrator Scout, who's also the narrator To Kill a Mockingbird, is an adult now in Go Set a Watchman who's working in the north, and she returns to the south to look after Atticus, and so she comes when the civil rights movement is in full swing, and so she is kind of appalled at some of the things she sees there and the changes in her father that she sees as a change. And I think the genius of Go Set a Watchman is that, as a history teacher who's read a lot on the civil rights movement and a northerner who maybe didn't understand it as well as I thought I did, to read Scout's account of going back to the south, having lived in the north, I think it has made some things much clearer for me. So I know this has been really long-winded, and just as a conclusion, I want to say that I've been reading Aidan Chambers' Tell Me this week, and I think that has helped me to appreciate metafictive devices more so as a way of getting finding things to get to students to share their thoughts on. And so I'm going to end there. So I hope that you have a greater understanding of some of the metafictive devices in especially Huckleberry Finn, and maybe even To Kill a Mockingbird and Go Set a Watchman. Thank you very much.